All right, we are live. Welcome everybody to the Gunner Technology Livestream, a weekly tech talk for non-techies and techies alike. I'm your host, Gary Merkins, and with me is CEO of Gunner Technology, Cody Swan. And I should say, finally we're live, right?
Yeah, we had a.
Sometimes the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry, so sometimes life has other plans.
I took the opportunity to catch some more Z's. I did the. It's been a while, but I did more than 24 hours straight awake. And then
it's good. It's good to give your body a little shock like that every now and then.
It hurts. It hurts a lot when you're this. It hurts a lot.
The older you get, the harder it is.
But it used to be so much easier. It used to be so much easier.
Could go days back in the day.
Yeah, days. 72 hours, I think, is my not 72. 70 hours is my most awake straight.
Yeah, launch at fan profiles. We were both awake for a solid 50 hours straight.
Yeah, and at the end of that, I was on the verge of murdering our boss.
Yeah, we were husks of our former selves. Never be the same. So let's dive right into it, I guess, now that we're finally on. Our Country Store giveaway this week, which actually I just realized I didn't look it up, who the winner is. Country Store Outfitters is a lifestyle brand for anyone who loves the outdoors. Visit them at countrystoreoutfitters.com. Sign up for the giveaway on our Facebook page. And the winner this week, I'm just pulling up now. Let's see what we got here. Clayton R. from Gaithersburg, Maryland. It's actually kind of my neck of the woods, my whole neck of the woods. I grew up in Bethesda, so we might have bumped into each other at some point, Clayton. Congratulations, though, on the Country Store giveaway win. You got a hat and copies of our ebooks coming your way. And everyone else who didn't win this week, sign up on our Facebook page for the Country Store giveaway and try and win yourself a sweet Country Store hat, as you can see here, and copies of our awesome ebooks. What were you going to say, Cody?
I would say I wonder if I bumped into him when I was in Ocean City a couple weeks ago.
I probably. Clayton's everywhere these days. And while you're on our Facebook page, go ahead and answer our question of the week, which this past week was pretty interesting. So what was that, Cody?
Yeah, so it was one of those you can't win for losing questions. So who do you trust more, Google or Facebook? And people are really trending toward Google.
Which kind of makes sense. Facebook's been more in the news recently,
right?
As far as the press stuff goes.
And we did that pop-up episode about Google suppressing conservative news, which I think that is more. It's weird because Google does the exact same data gathering that Facebook does. It's just, I guess they're not seen as a social network, so it's not as egregious in the eyes of the public, I guess, or they haven't had a data breach that has brought to light how much information they collect on us.
That is really interesting too. And there's probably also the angle of the social network making Zuckerberg look so awful that there's probably one central figure that you can point at that you dislike. So that probably makes Facebook easier to distrust or hate.
I guess so. Yeah. And I don't know. I don't really understand the animosity toward Mark Zuckerberg. I really don't.
I think people just hate Jesse Eisenberg, and it's sort of transference.
By the way, they began production on Zombieland 2. So.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah. And I think he'll be in. Isn't he going to be in that terrible villain DC villain movie?
No.
Because there was a teaser. We're getting a little bit off track, but there was a teaser at the end of Justice League, I think, where Lex Luthor was on a boat with what's the DC Deadpool?
Yeah.
Death Watch.
Death Watch. No, not Death Watch or something like that. His name is Anyway, it's the League of Villains. I think it is. Yeah.
The Extraordinary League of Not Gentlemen.
Extraordinary League of Bizarro Sean Connery.
They should drag Sean Connery out for that villain movie. But yeah, so Jesse Eisenberg, keep an eye out for him. The other interesting thing I was going to mention too is that Amazon is starting to get really into targeted advertising. I just saw an article that they're hoping to sort of unseat the big two, or at least become part of a big three as far as the ad market goes.
Huh.
So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. They have tons of data.
We integrate Country Shore with Amazon, and they have really started pumping out. I get a bunch of check out our new ad platform emails lately. So curious that seems to be a big push for them as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out too, because Amazon has a pretty solid track record of pushing out pretty innovative, powerful stuff. So I wouldn't put it past them to just, take a third of the market.
I was just talking to someone about this the other day, and there was something in, I don't know, WAPO or the Journal about how Amazon could face antitrust legislation or investigation. And I didn't see it at all. They're like, usually when antitrust comes in, it's because it's like it's damaging to the consumer, right? And you cannot argue that Amazon is damaging to the consumer. It's not at all. It helps the consumer out tremendously. But if they start cornering the market on advertising as well, and so consumers aren't even exposed to other options, then they may, I mean, again, I don't think they should be investigated for antitrust at all. But then if they go that route, they really are opening themselves up to a potential minefield there.
Yeah, that might push it a bit too far. Might be sort of a Pyrrhic victory if they can take the ad market and they get a huge antitrust lawsuit out of it.
Maybe they'll put us in charge of the AWS division. They'll break it up like the Ma and Pa Bells. And
yeah, give us a shout. Amazon, let us run your entire web services branch. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. Speaking of AWS, because this is one of the earliest AWS projects that we actually worked. And it's at home, a sense of what RadPad did. It's actually really cool. I actually really like this app.
I'm sorry, you cut out there for a second. Did you say give us a sense of what RadPad did?
Exactly. Okay. And then I said that it was a really cool app, because it was.
Yeah, so RadPad, this is one of our first projects. And basically what RadPad did was it started off as a place, it's just in Los Angeles at first, for a place for you to be able to find rentals, because at the time the only real alternative was to hire a service. I think it was called Westside Rentals. Was that the name of the big rental?
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right.
Yep. Westside Rentals, or go it your own on Craigslist. And if for anyone who hasn't lived in a big city, Los Angeles, like, the rental market is insane. Like, it's one of those things where it's like overwhelming trying to find a place. So it was really built to help these renters find a place to live. It started to evolve later in its lifetime into more landlord management app. So it basically provided a service to the renters to find a place to live, but then it was supposed to serve as a landlord tool to kind of collect rent and manage requests, and sort of like a CRM, a customer relationship management tool for landlords. So it really was interesting, and it was innovative in the fact that it was the first, probably not the first, but one of the first to put a nice interface over finding rentals, where you could like open a map and then zoom in and see clusters of areas where you could rent. I think that was where it was, if not innovative, it was one of the early adopters and had a slick user interface that made it popular to use.
And I think that was one of the earliest versions of Google Maps API, because I remember messing around with that. That was way back in the day, integrating that, right?
Oh gosh. So one of the things that was really difficult to do was to do clustering on that map, and to return the data in a way that Google Maps could ingest it. And so, like, imagine, like, again, if you're in Los Angeles and you're zoomed out a bit, you would see a million rentals. Well, you can't drop a million pins. So what you do is you drop like one pin, and then as you zoom in, that one pin becomes 10 pins. And then as you zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, it starts actually getting more accurate. You see hundreds of pins, and then, but you only see about 10 pins in that given screen. So as you zoom in, the pins get more fine, or more definite and definite. And so to be able to cluster them around a certain geographic area was so difficult at the time. And now it's just automatic. Like, you can set a clustering range with the map API and it'll do it for you, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's funny to think about how that was so cutting edge at that point, and now it's drop dead simple. I guess speaking of that, this is one of our early Rails apps too. So I think it was Rails 3 that we worked on, right, for RadPad.
Yeah, it actually, okay. So I believe when we started on it, it was on Rails 2, and the reason we got
way back.
Yeah, the reason that we got approached Jonathan Eppers, the CEO, the reason he approached us was because it was kind of well known that we had built ESPN's social media platform in Rails. So this was still back at the point in time when people were struggling to scale Rails, and RadPad really, it got featured in like TechCrunch or something, and it was having major problems standing up. And so that was why they contacted us initially. And I think part of our first project, we upgraded to Rails 3 and migrated to Heroku, where we could have some sort of auto scaling features around it.
That's a good opportunity to talk about Heroku, actually, which we've sort of kind of sadly moved off. We used Heroku for forever, but now we use a more direct AWS architecture implementation. But talk about the experience using Heroku back in the day.
Yeah, well, again, it really dates back to our experience at ESPN, where we were, I mean, we went from RightScale, which is, I don't even think a company anymore, to Heroku. And Heroku was, it basically, it's a platform as a service that is a wrapper around AWS pretty much. And so the reason we don't use Heroku anymore is because we can use AWS directly and get better service at lower costs.
Yeah, I mean, in Heroku's defense, those tools from AWS were awful to work with, or completely absent. Yeah,
right. Back then, AWS was a command line tool to launch EC2 instances with S3 buckets, and that was pretty much it.
Right.
I mean, that was it. So any sort of wrappers around those were awesome, and that's why we did it at. We moved to Heroku at ESPN, because you had Git push deployments, which makes deploying simple. You have, at the early days of Heroku, you had push button scalability, and then later on you had automatic scalability.
It also had pretty tight integration with Rails itself, so it was
exactly.
really solid platform for Rails development in general.
Well, initially Heroku was only Rails.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Anything else up there except for a Rails application. So yeah, it was really birthed out of the Rails movement, and it was later acquired by Salesforce, but we were using Heroku long before Salesforce acquired them. And so again, kind of going with what you know, and seeing that RadPad was having scaling issues, they were just using a single server. They had their database on that server. They had their, I think they were running mongrels on the server, and then they were running Nginx on the server. So they had a monolithic structure.
For the folks at home, that's not a good way to scale.
No, at all. Yeah, exactly. We can go into a whole other episode about horizontal versus vertical scaling, but that's not a way to do either of those. And so basically, they couldn't stand up. I mean, their app would slow down tremendously and break completely with any sort of load, meaning any sort of users using the application. So the first thing I did was implement caching, and so caching would prevent it from, it was running out of memory like crazy. The app leaked like a sieve, which is a problem with Rails 2 anyway. And so we implemented caching to kind of slow down the leaking. And then as a stopgap, I wrote a custom script that would check the memory usage on the box and restart it if it hit 99%. So it's like restarting constantly, because you can't just push a button and migrate. It takes time. It took us, a month or two to get it over to Heroku. So that's what we did, is like to triage it. And then once you got it over to Heroku, we started using, I think, Unicorn, the Unicorn servers. No, maybe, I can't remember. It was either Thin or Unicorn.
I think it was Unicorn.
Puma. Wait, Puma's the latest one. So
it wasn't Puma. Yeah,
it was Unicorn. It was Unicorn. And so then we had a auto scalability, where basically when the memory utilization hit a certain point, another instance spun up to take a share of the traffic. And then when the traffic subsided, it would kill the oldest instance. And so we'd always have a fresh instance kind of running. I think we always had at least 2 instances running, and as many as 10.
We got a question from a viewer, actually, what the current state of Heroku is, which is actually kind of interesting. I don't know what the numbers are as far as usage for Heroku is, but I would imagine it's down pretty substantially now that AWS's tools are pretty robust now, and I wouldn't say easy to use, but a lot easier to use than they were in the past. I think we still have one app running on Heroku. Is that right?
a single app. There's one single app, and I don't know how much longer that's going to last.
I almost want to leave it on there just for sentimentality's sake.
Well, okay, so you're right. If AWS, as easy it is to use now, some of their services are not easy to use at all, but some of their services are relatively easy. None of them are as easy as Heroku. So if you're a newbie developer just looking to put something out there so people can see it, Heroku is still the way to go. However, they have shifted their business model tremendously and now focus greatly, much more so on Salesforce integration. So you can write, I can't remember what they're called. It's like a DSL for Salesforce, and it has to run on Heroku, kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah, I took a course with a guy who worked at Heroku, whose point was that Heroku is way more user-centric than AWS's tools are. AWS's tools are sort of built from an engineer's perspective, where if it's not completely intuitive, they assume you'll figure out how to use it, and they're not completely worried about stuff being super simple to use right out of the gate or looking particularly good. But Heroku is more design-centered, user-centered, so it is a lot easier to work with Heroku. It's just that if you're comfortable using AWS, there's really no reason to do it, because there's no reason to have that middle if you can just do it directly.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, all you have to do to figure out how to get Heroku up and running is figure out how to basically push to get, and then that's it. And by the way, what I was thinking of is Apex. Apex is their
Salesforce integration?
Salesforce integration programming.
Okay. So I guess anyone interested in using Salesforce on AWS might take a look at Heroku too. It might be a good use case for it. Talk about the rest of RadPad. We've talked about Rails. We've talked about using Heroku to actually launch it, but what was the actual development of the product like? What was the flow there?
Yeah, so like I said, it was mainly at the time a iOS application. There was no Droid version. It was only an iOS application, and there was no web version. They had like a landing page that you could get to via web browser that would say what RadPad was and where to download it. So it was heavily used APIs, which at that point it was a JSON-based REST API that ran on the Rails application, and that's what would tip over. The other thing that was really difficult, and this is where I wish, this was so long ago, AWS didn't have some of the really nice features like Lambda and Scheduler and CloudWatch and all that stuff. But what we did, and eventually led to RadPad getting in trouble, was we had to get the listing data from somewhere, right? Like basically it wasn't a landlord tool at the time, so landlords weren't putting their rental listings on online or online using RadPad. So we had to get that data from somewhere, and they were doing this before we took over. Before we took over, they were already doing this, and I kind of warned them about it, which went unheeded. But they basically were scraping the data from Craigslist, and Westside Rentals. And so basically, Westside Rentals was subscription only. You had to pay for it. So they basically paid for a subscription to Westside Rentals. And Westside Rentals had a terrible website where you would go and log in with your username and password, and then you could look at the listings. And I think Website Rentals, even by subscribing, you only got one area. You got like West Hollywood or like Santa Monica. I think they broke it up like that too. So RadPad had several subscriptions. And then, of course, Craigslist was free. So we had all these background processes, which we ended up rewriting. And this is why I say I wish AWS was further along, because they have tools to make this a lot easier. And so those background processes, meaning these things they were running on the Rails app at the time, but they were running behind the scenes using delayed job where no user saw what was going on. And so each delayed job instance would run code that would basically, they were bots, and these bots would log into Westside Rentals using the credentials that RadPad paid for, or just crawl through
just scrape Craigslist pages.
Yeah, for new rental listings and using kind of um, basically we would look at the code on the page because the code is for HTML is public. So you would basically look at the code, meaning look at the code, the application, the bot would look at the code and extract certain things. We taught it how to recognize like an address. We taught it how to recognize a price. We taught it how to recognize how many beds, baths, things like that. And it would then input that data into the RadPad database. And so you can imagine how many listings it would have to scrape. So how many background workers would be working at all times to kind of pull that data. Not only pull the data, but it would have to update the data too. Because if a listing went off the market, you want to take it off the market. So we were running tons of workers constantly pulling from all these different sources. And of course, that's against the terms of use. And the plan was basically to do this until RadPad became a source to input the data itself.
Right. It was just a stopgap solution.
Yeah. The problem was that RadPad got exceedingly popular, really popular. It went nationwide, but people just never used it to input the source data. They just never did it. And so, at some point when it got so popular, Craigslist was like, wait a minute, they catch you.
These bots are hitting us constantly.
Right. And Craigslist isn't stupid. Like it was a cat and mouse game. So like we would have to spin up new bots in different IP ranges and all that stuff. And basically Craigslist finally like, okay, we know who's doing this. They filed a massive lawsuit against RadPad. This is long after, I think this was in 2016. We stopped working with RadPad in like 2012, I think. So long after we were there, long after we were working with them, and basically shut down RadPad, and then RadPad was then bought out of bankruptcy by another company. So the thing that's interesting is bots aren't bad. We have a few case studies that I was just writing last night about where we've implemented bots. And so basically when you implement bots is you're doing so because the data source you're trying to integrate with doesn't offer an official way to get at that data. So for example, Facebook has the Facebook API, which has a proper use case, which will allow you to get information about yourself or about other users. And they have rules around that. You're not supposed to store that data. They say what you can do with that data and then how to access it. So they have an official API. But like the example I use is like, let's say you wanted to pull information from your old high school, your old high school website, maybe about like what time the football game is every Friday. So chances are your high school doesn't offer a methodology, an API, an official API for pulling that data. You can write a bot that will just go scrape that data every Thursday, say, and then email or text you the time of the football game, the time and location of the football game. And unless the high school has some reason that it doesn't want you doing that, it's perfectly legitimate. And they'll have a terms of use on their site that says, this data is our data. You cannot use it for anything else. But a lot of times it's not so much protecting the data as Craigslist would want to do because it's their business model, so much as they don't have the talent, the time, the resources to build an API. So you have to go the route of writing a scraper bot.
Man, a lot of questions there. There's actually, do you remember what that old tool was to build your own API where you could input a page and it would alert you when it was updated? And you could subscribe to it like an RSS feed? Or was that even just like a native thing on Chrome?
Are you thinking of Yahoo Pipes?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, Yahoo Pipes was awesome. It was so cool. Like you could basically take a number of sources. It was almost like GraphQL in a way.
Yeah,
you could take a number of sources like ESPN, for example, and even if ESPN didn't have an official API, and again, this would be against ESPN's terms of service, but I'm using it as an example. You could train the pipe to recognize score data, and then you could, for example, add another source that would pull in when lottery drawings were, and you could create your lottery pick numbers based off of score, like the scoring of a given football game,
right.
and then and then send you an alert for what you should use for your lottery numbers this week.
By the way, looking at RadPad's Wikipedia page, do you remember the 2013 Westside Rentals lawsuit?
I do remember that, although
they dropped it. They dropped it eventually, but
right. And I was still in contact with Jonathan at that time, and I think basically that what RadPad agreed was they weren't going to do that anymore, and that's why the lawsuit got dropped. So I do remember that because they did stop using Westside Rentals as a source of data, and I just don't think they ever stopped using Craigslist.
And on the Craigslist note, $60 million was the settlement for that lawsuit against RadPad.
It's insane, and I can tell you, RadPad did not have $60 million in cash laying around.
I guess they were the second at that point. They were the second largest rental finding service in the country.
Yeah. Yep.
So they really do you know offhand whether they were still using our application at that point in any way, shape, or form?
I do not know. I know they were using it up until 2000. I know they were using our Heroku setup up until 2014 because we still had access to the Heroku instance at that point. And
not to indemnify ourselves or open ourselves up to a huge lawsuit from Craigslist, but I was just curious. They probably weren't. In fact, let's say they definitely weren't. So any other thoughts on RadPad as far as the stack goes, or the development methodology, or anything else with that project?
Well, you know what's crazy about RadPad, and it really is, obviously became a cautionary tale, but it really is a success story because the company really was founded by two guys, Jonathan Eppers, and I don't remember Tyler Galpin. Holy cow, I don't know how I remember that. Tyler Galpin.
And Tim Watson.
Tim Watson was actually not a co-founder. He was brought in very early on as the designer, but it was conceptualized by Tyler Galpin and Jonathan Eppers. And Tim Watson was the iOS developer, the original iOS. He was more of a designer, UI, UX designer. And so Tyler was MIA right after it launched. I don't know what his deal was, but the entire time we worked with him, I never met Tyler. And I would go to their offices in Santa Monica quite regularly. And I say offices, this is where I mean it's really a success story. They basically co-load with a number of other startups in Santa Monica. No, not Santa Monica, Venice. And I believe it's either one of the two. And so basically Tim Watson and Jonathan Eppers. And Jonathan Eppers is that guy. What I'm saying is he's a success story for the guys out there who have an idea and really want to make it push. But the thing is like, we always run into this where we work with entrepreneurs and they're like, okay, here's my idea, build it. And they're like, well, why isn't anyone using it? It's because it's because you're working another job, or, you know, you're in school, or you have kids. It's because you're not out there pushing it. Eppers lived this thing. He quit his job, pushed it. Now, again, he raised a little bit of money initially, but not enough to sustain him for very long. And he pushed the hell out of this thing. And it really is like a success story in that, like, it goes to show you that you don't need a large team. Literally, it was him and Tim, and then they brought in us as staff augmentation, and they made this thing happen based on basically blood, sweat, and tears.
Would you say this is a case study in marketing? Was most of the effort put towards just getting the word out and trying to get as many people using it as possible?
Yep. I mean, because honestly, like I said, and this isn't to diminish what we did, but what we did is nothing special, right? We fine-tuned an API. We added some functionality to an API.
We made it more stable.
Scaled an infrastructure, right? Like, there's nothing unique about that at all. It's a lot of work and it's hard work, but there's nothing unique about it. But I mean, Jonathan would educate himself. He became an expert in the rental market. So he would go on like KTLA, which is the big news network out in LA, and they would bring him on every week to give the rental report, the rental market report.
Mm-hmm.
And every time he was on, obviously, he'd be like, you can check out this and more on a RadPad app. Like, I mean, he like bulldogged his way into so many marketing opportunities that just weren't there. It wasn't like sure, they did traditional marketing. They eventually got a billboard in LA, but it was all about him like injecting himself everywhere whenever there was like a discussion on rental properties in Los Angeles.
Well, I guess that's interesting too, because you say it's nothing unique that we did, but it's also nothing unique that RadPad did, in the sense that they were basically getting all their data from two services that were providing the exact same service that they were. So really, it's a matter of getting the word out and then refining your product based on feedback from users and making it more useful for people. But really, it's about getting the word out and just sort of getting the name RadPad in everyone's head as far as where you should go to find a rental in the Los Angeles area.
That's exactly right. And when I say unique, I mean what Jonathan, I think that the thing that was unique about this company was what Jonathan did.
Exactly, right. Yeah, exactly.
He created unique opportunities to push the application. The idea wasn't in and of itself unique. As a matter of fact, the thing about it that they wanted to get to, where it was a property management tool or a landlord tool, that was, I didn't see anything else out there like that at the time. So I'll say it was unique. At least it was unusual or rare, not mainstream. And that was a thing that never really took off. So it really just goes to show you exactly what you said. So much of it is about having someone to just push it and live it and like preach the gospel of whatever it is, and just get it. Like you said, whenever someone thinks rentals, oh, RadPad, that's how you do it, because what made it special and what made it popular was nothing unique at all.
It's really interesting. It's a great takeaway from this episode. I think that's sort of...
We buried the lead. We buried the lead.
Yeah. The undervalued importance of just getting the word out. It's basically the entirety of success.
Yeah,
almost.
Exactly.
So I guess that'll do it for this week's episode of the Gunner Technology Livestream. Make sure to check out the blog post for this episode at gunnertech.com. The podcast will be up on iTunes. You can check out our ebooks at iBooks, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Kobo, and anywhere else ebooks are sold. Make sure to hop on our Facebook page and sign up for the Country Store giveaway. Country Store Outfitters is a lifestyle brand for anyone who loves the outdoors. Visit them at countrystoreoutfitters.com. And while you're on our Facebook page, I actually don't think you even mentioned this earlier.
We didn't give away the current.
Oh man, this episode is full of M. Night Shyamalan plot twists at the very end. So what was the question of the week for this upcoming week?
Okay, so it is, what do you use as your primary mobile device, Android or iPhone? And if you use a BlackBerry or a Windows device, you don't count.
You don't exist.
And the GIF I found this week for Android is, I think he has a name. What is that
little robot, the green robot?
They all have a name. It's not Andy, the Android. It has no official name.
You know, it has a name that's really interesting. And I think I told you this before, but Bank of America has, I guess, like an Alexa or a Siri type AI now, and it's called Erica. Yeah. It's called Erica, and all the boards say "I am Erica," so I America, and they have like Bank of America with America underneath it. I thought it was pretty clever. It's pretty good. Someone got paid the big bucks for coming up with that.
So no official name, but the internal team at Google call him Bug Droid. So I have a GIF of Bug Droid rubbing the Apple logo on his butt.
That's appropriate.
So I feel like I accomplished a lot this week.
I am actually genuinely interested in seeing what the numbers are, because I've heard that iPhone's numbers are starting to go down. I think their devices are getting a little bit price prohibitive.
I mean, I would love. I obviously have Android devices because we develop on them, and I just cannot. I just like iPhones more. I want to like Androids more. I really do.
You know what I don't like about Android is that they're so cluttered out of the gate.
Yeah.
When you first start up Android, it's just a hot mess, and it takes you so long just to clean it up and make it look kind of nice. I think that Apple aesthetic has always been kind of its selling point.
Yeah, I know. It's just exactly. The UX is just
really the devices themselves. I mean, I think the 5S or what became the SE, I think is just about the best mobile device I've ever seen. Although they've kind of gone the way of Android now, where they have like the giant devices now.
Yeah,
I think 6.5 inches is the iPhone SX.
I can't stand that.
Or XS.
But also on the plus side for Android, it runs on Java, so if you turn it upside down, you can fry an egg on it.
It's so true.
Zing!
Funny because it's true. Take that, Java.
Yeah.
Take that. Oracle guy, what's his name? Tim Ellison, in your face. All right, so that's going to do it for this week's episode. Make sure to tune in next Thursday. We'll be on at our regular scheduled time, I assume, 1 p.m. Eastern. So I'm Derry, that's Cody, and we'll see you next week.